He walked in for a cup of coffee, and nearly dropped it when he saw the man mopping the floor. It wasn't just any man, it was someone who once led one of Tesla's most important projects. But what happened next wasn't just surprising, it changed everything. Before we begin the story, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers soon. Your support is the motivation that drives us to create even more engaging content. Thank you. It was close to 10 o'clock when Elon Musk pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of a McDonald's just off the highway. He was dressed casually, jeans, a worn gray hoodie, nothing that screamed billionaire. After a long day filled with meetings, numbers, and decisions, all he wanted was a quick bite before heading back to the hotel. The restaurant was quiet. A couple of teenagers sat in a corner, their faces buried in their phones, while a tired-looking family waited for their order near the back. Elon stepped up to the counter, reading the glowing menu above without much focus. "Next, please," a voice called. Elon glanced up. The man behind the register looked vaguely familiar, mid-40s, thin frame, sharp eyes, and a posture that didn't quite fit the uniform he wore. The name tag read, Darren. There was a beat, a flicker of recognition in the man's eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came. Darren offered a polite smile. "May I take your order?" Elon ordered something simple. As he waited, the card reader suddenly beeped twice. Then froze. The screen flashed red. "Sorry, give me just a moment," Darren said, calm and composed. Without calling for help, he reached under the counter, popped open the terminal panel, and adjusted a set of internal wires with swift, practiced movements. Within seconds, the screen came back to life. A younger crew member next to him blinked. "Whoa, I didn't even know that was possible." Darren didn't respond. He just nodded once and resumed his task. Elon stared. He wasn't an expert on all the tech McDonald's used, but he knew precision when he saw it. The way Darren handled the repair, it wasn't improvisation. It was skill, measured and trained. When the order was ready, Darren slid the tray toward him without meeting his eyes. Elon took a step closer. "Your name's Darren, right? Darren Yu?" There was a pause. Darren looked up for a brief second, and something flickered behind his glasses, recognition, discomfort, maybe even shame. He nodded slowly, then dropped his gaze to the counter again. Elon hesitated. There was so much he wanted to ask, but he sensed it wasn't the time. He offered a quiet, "Thank you," took his food, and walked out into the cool night air. As he sat in his car, staring at the paper bag in the passenger seat, Elon's mind drifted back a few years. He remembered a quarterly meeting at Tesla Tech Presentations. A room full of engineers. There was a young man who stood at the edge of the spotlight, saying little but building everything that made the presentation shine. "You. Brilliant but quiet. One of our finest." And now, here, the fries were getting cold. But Elon didn't care. Something didn't add up, and something inside him told him, this wasn't just a coincidence. That night, back in his private study, Elon couldn't shake the look on Darren's face. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was deeper than that. Shame, maybe, or something heavier. He poured himself a glass of water, but didn't drink it. Instead, he opened his laptop, hesitated for a moment, then logged into Tesla's internal HR archive. The system took a few seconds to load. Once it did, Elon typed in the name, Darren Yu. A few entries appeared. One was his hiring record, 10 years ago. Another detailed his promotion to lead engineer on the high-temperature battery initiative. And then, the last line, terminated. Reason: severe ethical violation. 2 years ago. Elon frowned. He clicked on the termination report. It wasn't much. A short summary referencing vague misconduct, with no attached incident reports or internal investigation files. The file contained only a few internal notes, all signed off by Victor Sloan, now Vice President of Regional Operations. Victor had always struck Elon as sharp and results-driven, someone who didn't waste time sugarcoating things. But he also had a reputation, strict to the point of ruthless, especially with employees who questioned directives. Still, this didn't add up. Darren had once been one of the most promising engineers in the division. Elon remembered that distinctly. It wasn't like him to make a moral misstep, let alone something that would warrant an abrupt termination. Curious, Elon dug deeper. He began scanning his archived emails, sorting them by date. It took a while, but eventually, he found something. An old email from Darren, dated just days before his dismissal. Subject: Data discrepancy in cell prototype 7C. The message was concise but clear. Darren had discovered an inconsistency in the test data for a new battery cell model and recommended pausing the trial rollout until the data could be verified. There was no response in the thread, just silence. Right after that message, a formal notice of suspension had been issued. Elon leaned back in his chair. His eyes moved across the screen, then to a sticky note stuck to the edge of his monitor, one he hadn't touched in ages. It read, "Darren's daughter, health insurance issue?" Now that came flooding back. Elon remembered passing Darren in the hallway one afternoon. Years ago. The man looked worn down. Not from work, but something else. Elon had overheard a snippet. Something about hospital bills and a problem with insurance coverage. Darren hadn't made a big deal out of it. Just asked if HR could expedite a document. Elon rubbed his jaw, then stood and paced. A brilliant engineer flags a data issue in a critical project. His report is ignored. Days later, he's terminated. And during all of this, his child was sick, and losing his job meant losing her health coverage. The pieces weren't lining up, they were falling into place. He sat back down, opened a new message window, and started drafting an internal inquiry. Then he stopped. Not yet. He needed more. But one thing was already clear. Darren hadn't been let go because of ethics. He'd been silenced, and no one had bothered to look back until now. The following morning, Elon arrived at Tesla's Fremont office earlier than usual. He didn't notify his assistant, didn't stop by his own office, and didn't greet the security team beyond a brief nod. Instead, he headed straight for the HR floor, his steps firm and quiet, like a man walking towards something he already suspected but didn't want to believe. He met with Marcy, the head of HR, and asked for access to any internal files, meeting logs, or correspondence connected to Darren Yu's termination. Marcy hesitated, saying the request would normally require legal approval. Elon just raised an eyebrow. 10 minutes later, he had everything. The pile wasn't large, less than expected. That, in itself, was telling. He flipped through reports, skimming notes, his brow tightening as he read. One document stood out. It referenced a closed-door meeting from 2 years ago, where Darren reportedly challenged the data presented on a battery prototype. The notes were vague, filled with corporate phrases like team misalignment and communication breakdown. But there was also an unofficial transcript, submitted quietly by a junior administrative assistant, detailing how Darren had been pressured to withdraw his objection. Told that continuing to push the issue would jeopardize the company's external perception. Another email, dated 3 days later, came from Victor Sloan. It recommended immediate dismissal due to erosion of team trust and ethics concerns. No further explanation, no review, just a signature and silence. Elon closed the folder slowly. His jaw tightened. He had built Tesla to challenge the norms, to be better than the old institutions that prioritized numbers over people. And yet, somehow, this had happened right under his nose. He wasn't angry at a single bad decision, he was angry at a system that let it pass without question. Meanwhile, across town, Darren was wiping down a table at the back of McDonald's. Moving with quiet focus, the manager on shift leaned toward a new hire and said in a hushed voice, "Watch that one. Used to work somewhere big. Got canned. Something about ethics issues." Darren froze mid-wipe. He didn't turn, didn't speak, but the mop in his hand slowed, then paused. His head dipped slightly, as if the words were heavier than he wanted to admit. Luis, a high school kid on part-time shifts, had noticed. He approached slowly and asked, "Is it true you were an engineer?" Darren looked at him for a second, then gave the faintest shake of his head. Not a denial, just a way of saying he didn't want to talk about it. Back at Tesla, Elon requested a private meeting with Victor Sloan. They met on the top floor, a polished boardroom with glass walls that looked out across the Bay Area. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the HVAC and the steady tick of a wall clock. Victor entered with his usual confidence. Well-dressed, well-spoken, And just the right amount of professional courtesy. Elon didn't waste time. Explain to me why Darren Yu was fired, he said, holding the thin file in his hand like a piece of evidence. Victor sat down calmly. It was a necessary step. Darren disrupted team dynamics and refused to align with the leadership's direction. His behavior eroded trust. Which part? Elon asked, raising concerns about faulty data? That's not erosion. That's responsibility. Victor leaned back slightly. He caused confusion. We had a deadline, a public target. He wanted to pause everything based on a hunch. A hunch backed by numbers. Elon replied, I read the report. Victor's expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered. I followed protocol. He was warned. And his daughter? You knew about her condition. You knew what firing him would mean for her treatment. There was a moment's silence. Then Victor gave a small, dry chuckle. I didn't think he'd let his personal life interfere with professional duties. We're not a charity, Elon. That was it. Elon stood. His voice was cold, but steady. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you've forgotten that people work here, not machines. Maybe the wrong person was let go that day. Victor remained seated, still wearing the confident mask of a man who'd played the corporate game too long to feel the sting of a single conversation. Elon didn't say anything more. He walked out, leaving behind a room full of windows, a view full of light, and a man sitting in the dark without even realizing it. The next morning, the usual rhythm at the McDonald's on Pine Street was quietly humming along. The hiss of fryers, the soft ding of timers, and the rustle of paper bags filled the air as customers moved in and out without noticing the man behind the counter. Darren, in his usual faded uniform, wiped down trays with the quiet concentration of someone who had made peace with being invisible. Luis, the young part-timer with bright eyes and quick hands, approached with a bottle of cold water. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder before leaning in. I googled your name last night, he whispered. You were a senior engineer at Tesla. Man, like, seriously high level. Why didn't you ever say anything? Darren took the water, his expression softening. He gave a small, tired smile. That was a long time ago. He said, I'm not that guy anymore. His gaze shifted toward the kitchen mirror mounted above the grill. In the smudged reflection, he saw himself as he was now, gray creeping into his hair. Hands roughened by manual work. A paper hat tilted too low on his forehead. He looked like any other fast food worker ending another shift. Not the man who once helped design the battery tech that powered half the nation's electric vehicles. Later that afternoon, during the lunch rush, one of the deep fryers sputtered with a sharp hiss. A minor electrical short caused it to stop mid-cycle. Orders started backing up. Customers grew restless. Darren saw the issue instantly, an easy fix. A temporary bypass that could keep things running safely. Without a word, he reached into the back panel, carefully adjusting a loose connector and resetting the internal timer. Just as the fryer kicked back to life, a voice snapped from across the kitchen. What do you think you're doing? It was Kelly, the floor manager. She marched toward him, arms crossed, eyes blazing. You're not licensed to touch that equipment, she snapped, her voice loud enough for the customers near the counter to hear. I don't care what you used to be. This isn't Tesla. This is a restaurant. You follow the rules like everyone else. The crew froze, spatulas suspended midair. Luis turned away from the register, his jaw slightly open. Darren stood still, his hands at his sides. The sting of humiliation burned deeper than the oil ever could. I was just trying to help, he said quietly. You're not paid to help. You're paid to listen. She turned on her heel and walked off, the room slowly returning to its pace. Darren didn't speak again for the rest of the shift. At the end of the day, Kelly summoned him into the cramped office behind the soda machine. This is your final warning, she said, folding her arms. You broke protocol. Next time, you're out. Darren nodded, didn't argue, just thanked her and stepped out. Luis was waiting near the back door, pretending to scroll through his phone. He glanced up as Darren passed. Why do you let them talk to you like that? He asked. Voice low. You could do anything. You don't belong here. Darren paused. For a moment, it seemed like he might respond. But instead, he just gave a soft shake of his head and pushed the door open. Stepping into the cool evening without a word. Across town, Elon sat alone in his office. The lights dimmed except for the glow of his laptop. On screen was an old internal video, unearthed from Tesla's archived servers. The footage was grainy but clear enough to show Darren, 2 years younger, standing in front of a crowd of engineers. He had just completed a presentation on thermal stability in battery cells, complex technical work, but he spoke with clarity and quiet confidence. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Elon himself had walked up to the stage, handed Darren a plaque, and said into the mic, "People like you are the reason this company works." Watching it now, Elon sat in silence, his elbows on the desk, hands folded under his chin. His eyes didn't leave the screen even after the video ended. How had this man gone from leading-edge engineering to cleaning tables at a fast food chain? Elon finally leaned back and stared out the window. The city lights below blinked like tired eyes. Just barely keeping up, he picked up the phone. "Schedule me a trip," he said to his assistant. "Tomorrow morning. I want to meet him face to face." The morning started like any other. The scent of coffee mixed with the sizzle of hash browns on the grill, and the low hum of early customers filled the McDonald's on the corner of Maple and 5th. Darren walked in through the side door, apron in hand, tying it behind his back as he passed the prep counter. Luis looked up from the register, eyes wide. "Hey," he said quietly, leaning in as Darren walked by. "There's a guy in the corner booth. He's been watching you since he sat down." Darren frowned. He followed Luis's gaze toward the table near the window. There, in a plain gray hoodie and jeans, sat Elon Musk, a paper coffee cup resting between his hands. He wasn't surrounded by assistants. No fanfare, just sitting alone, looking around the restaurant like he belonged there. The atmosphere shifted fast. A young couple near the counter whispered and checked their phones. A middle-aged man pulled out his camera phone and discreetly snapped a photo. The hum of conversation grew louder, curiosity spreading like a breeze through dry grass. Kelly, the floor manager, straightened her shirt and smoothed her hair before approaching Elon with a forced smile. "Sir, can I get you anything else?" she asked, trying to maintain composure. Elon didn't glance at her. He pointed gently toward the kitchen. "I'm here to speak with him," he said, his voice calm but clear. Kelly followed his gesture and saw Darren, frozen in place, his hands still clutching a tray of breakfast sandwiches. Her smile dropped. She turned to Darren with a sharp look and motioned toward the back door. "Take this outside, now," she whispered through gritted teeth. Darren hesitated. His eyes flicked from Kelly to Elon, then back again. Everything in his posture screamed discomfort. But Elon didn't move. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with Darren. "I'm not here as a CEO," Elon said, his voice carrying just enough to silence the room. "I'm here as a man who let something go very wrong." The restaurant went quiet. Even the fryers seemed to hush. Luis stepped back slowly, one hand slipping into his pocket. He tapped his phone camera on. Heart pounding. Elon stood. His movements were slow, deliberate, respectful. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small silver ID badge. On it, the Tesla logo gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "You're still in our system," he said. "I made sure of it before I came here. This isn't about pity. It's about doing what should have been done a long time ago." He held out the badge. "I want you back, Darren. Not just back on the team. I want you leading the new battery initiative. The work you started, it was ahead of its time. And we need that now more than ever." Darren's hands stayed at his sides. He didn't speak, didn't blink. Kelly stepped in, her voice louder than it needed to be. "He has a shift. He signed a contract. He's not going anywhere." Elon turned to her slowly, the calm never leaving his face. "He doesn't belong here," he said, "not because he's too good for fast food, but because he's carrying something bigger than fry baskets and shift schedules. And I'm not leaving without him." The silence that followed was almost reverent. Then, from the corner of the room, a sound, soft but distinct. A single clap, followed by another, and then more. Luis was crying, not loud sobs, just tears slipping quietly down his face as he clapped, the phone in his hand still recording. Customers rose to their feet, one by one. The woman with the baby, the teenager in the hoodie, the man who came in every morning for black coffee. Each of them joined in. The applause grew louder, more sincere with each second, until it echoed off the tile and glass and steel. Darren looked around the room, eyes stinging. He hadn't felt seen in years. Not really, not like this. He reached out and took the badge. It felt heavier than it looked. Elon smiled, placing a hand lightly on Darren's shoulder. "Let's go," he said, as they walked out together. The restaurant buzzed with something new. Not just the stir of gossip or viral video chatter, but something deeper. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, the world still had a few surprises left, for those who deserved them. The ride back to Tesla headquarters was quiet at first. Darren sat in the passenger seat of Elon's Model S, staring out the window as the city moved past them like a silent reel of memories, none of which felt real anymore. Elon didn't push, he simply waited. After a few minutes, Darren finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "My daughter was diagnosed with leukemia the same week I found the data inconsistency," he said, eyes still fixed on the road outside. "I didn't know how to process it. I thought maybe if I focused on work, at least one part of my life would make sense." Elon nodded, his hands still on the wheel, listening. "I flagged the test results immediately." Darren continued. "Those batteries were overheating during high-temperature simulations, and the data was being smoothed over. When I brought it to Victor, he told me to drop it, said I was overthinking, that we needed the launch to stay on track." "And when you didn't?" Elon asked quietly. Darren looked at him then. "For the first time since they left the restaurant, I got a call from HR the next day. They said my behavior had been flagged for questionable professional conduct. I didn't even know what that meant. Then I got the notice that my employment and my family's insurance were terminated." He paused, his jaw tight. "I begged them not to cancel the coverage. I wasn't asking for a raise or a promotion. I just needed a few more months. Just until she could start her treatment." Elon gripped the wheel tighter, saying nothing. "They told me it was out of their hands. That someone, higher up, made the call." Back at Tesla's Fremont campus, Elon didn't stop to delegate. He marched straight to legal and demanded every document, every memo, every email related to Darren's termination. Within the hour, a senior attorney named Mark Denham stood at Elon's desk with a folder of printed records and a troubled expression. "We were told to wrap this quickly," Mark admitted. There was internal pressure to avoid any appearance of instability before the investor meeting that quarter. "Pressure from who?" Elon asked, though he already knew. Mark hesitated. "Operations." Victor's name came up in a few of the emails. Elon didn't reply. He simply turned to his computer, logged into the internal archive, and ran a search for the original project meeting. A moment later, a buried video file appeared, flagged as non-essential, never reviewed. It showed a small conference room. Darren sat at the end of the table, calm but firm, explaining the thermal risk in the battery cell design. Mid-sentence, Victor Sloan cut him off. "You don't get to lecture us." Victor barked on the recording. "This isn't a university classroom. You're not paid to second-guess direction." The clip ended with Victor slamming a binder shut and storming out, leaving Darren speechless. Elon sat back, eyes locked on the dark screen. "Get Victor in here," he said. 10 minutes later, Victor entered the room with his usual swagger. But that faded fast as he saw the look on Elon's face. "You're suspended. Effective immediately," Elon said before Victor could speak. "An investigation will be launched into your conduct and handling of the battery program." Victor opened his mouth, but Elon cut him off. "You prioritized optics over safety. You destroyed a man's career. You gambled with a child's health, and you did it behind closed doors." As security escorted Victor out, Elon turned to Darren, who had been watching silently from the doorway. The hallway outside the old project lab felt both familiar and foreign to Darren. The room had been gutted since he left, whiteboards erased, desks cleared, but the faint outlines of his team's old plans still lingered on the glass walls, like ghosts waiting to be acknowledged. Elon walked up beside him. "This will be the new energy lab," he said, "and I want you running it." Darren hesitated, his hands, still calloused from the fryer and grill, shook slightly. "I'm not the man I was," he said softly. "No," Elon replied. "You're better, because now you know what it's like to lose everything and still stand." That kind of experience, no school or job title can match it. He placed a hand on Darren's shoulder. I don't just want you back. I want you to rewrite what they tried to bury. By the end of the day, Tesla issued a formal announcement. Darren Yu would return as technical director for the next generation battery initiative. The company pledged full medical coverage for his family and issued a public apology for the wrongful termination. The message closed with a simple line. One Elon personally approved. We cannot change the past, but we will take responsibility for it and make sure it never happens again. Darren read the statement later that night, sitting in the quiet of his apartment while his daughter slept in the next room. He didn't smile, not quite, but something in his chest felt lighter. For the first time in a long while, he believed things might change. The video of Elon Musk standing inside a McDonald's, offering Darren Yu his job back, exploded online within hours. Luis had uploaded it without thinking much, just a moment of hope he wanted the world to see. But by the next morning, it had been viewed over 10 million times. News anchors dissected every second of the clip. Blogs, podcasts, and talk shows debated what it all meant. Some hailed it as a rare moment of corporate accountability. Others weren't so kind. One headline read, "Fallen engineer or fabricated victim." Another asked, "Is Elon playing hero to distract from something bigger?" Inside Tesla, the ripple became a wave. Emails started pouring in, anonymous ones, sent from personal accounts, routed through VPNs. Some were only a few lines long. Others came with attached documents, meeting minutes, even private Slack screenshots. Most of them had one thing in common. They pointed to Victor Sloan. He forced us to falsify testing data. We were told to stay quiet or lose our jobs. He threatened to blacklist me in the industry. Elon sat in his private meeting room with Darren, Mark Denham from legal, and 2 other board members. The air was thick with tension. A pile of printed documents sat in the middle of the table. Mark flipped through them slowly. "There's a pattern here," he said, "not just Darren. This spans years." A younger board member leaned back in his chair. "If this goes public, the fallout could be massive. We're talking investor panic, legal probes, shareholder lawsuits." Darren sat still, hands clasped, eyes focused. "I'm not looking to destroy Tesla," he said softly. "I just want the truth to matter again." Elon didn't look away. Justice never ruins the truth. Cover-ups do. Just then, Elon's assistant stepped into the room and handed him a folder. Inside was a printed report. Internal meeting transcripts from a reputation management session led by Victor just 2 nights ago. In those transcripts, Victor had labeled Darren's reinstatement as a temporary PR stunt and instructed managers to avoid discussing the case with their teams. He had also quietly launched a new task force, supposedly to assess internal leaks, but in practice, it was intimidation. Several employees who once worked under Darren were suddenly called in for one-on-one meetings. No HR representative present, no documentation afterward, just vague warnings about non-compliance and exposing the company. The culture of fear was returning, and Luis, bright, optimistic Luis, was now caught in it. He received the first anonymous text just after dinner. "Take the video down. You don't want trouble." He tried to laugh it off. But then came another. "We know where you work. We know what you care about." That one shook him. He started to delete the video. Then his phone rang. He almost didn't pick up. But when he saw the caller ID, he froze. It was Elon. Luis answered with a trembling voice. "I didn't mean to cause." "Luis," Elon said, calm and clear, "you did the right thing. And you're not alone. We've taken steps to protect you. If anything happens, you call me or my office immediately." Luis sat in silence for a moment. Then he whispered, "They're threatening me." "I know," Elon replied, "but bullies only win when good people stay silent. You spoke up. That takes guts." Luis didn't reply, but his hand slowly moved away from the delete button. That same night, in a quiet apartment miles away, Darren opened an anonymous email. The subject line read, "Think twice." Attached was a single image, his daughter's medical record, scanned and highlighted. Below it, a short message, "Resign, or the world learns more about her than you'd like." Darren stared at the screen. His breath caught in his chest. His mind raced. Was this a bluff? A sick scare tactic? Or did someone actually have access to her files? He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out into the night. The lights of the city twinkled like they always did. But tonight, they felt colder, more distant. He had only just gotten his name back. And now, someone was threatening the only thing that ever truly mattered to him. As the minutes passed, Darren didn't move. Outside, the world kept turning. Inside, a quiet war had begun. Darren hadn't slept. He'd spent the night at the hospital, seated beside his daughter's bed, watching the rhythm of her breathing and the soft beep of machines. Her hand, so small, so fragile, lay curled around his finger, a thin tube taped to her wrist. Across the room, his wife, Emily, sat motionless. For days, she'd stayed silent, carrying the weight of fear the way only a mother could. But now, her voice broke through the quiet. "I don't want you to keep fighting," she said, eyes red but steady. "We can't take any more. You're breaking apart. We're all breaking." Darren looked at her, then at the little girl between them. He leaned in and pressed a kiss to his daughter's forehead. "I can't stop now," he said. "Because of her. Because of you. I have to see this through." The next morning, he walked into Tesla headquarters not as an employee, but as a man who refused to stay silent. He carried with him a thick binder, emails, technical logs, screenshots, and internal notes, files he'd saved, quietly, the night before his badge stopped working. Elon was already in the executive conference room when Darren arrived. Within 30 minutes, the room filled with board members, legal advisors, and division heads. Some offered stiff nods, others avoided his eyes. Elon stood at the head of the table, his voice firm. "We're not here to manage a narrative. We're here to confront it. Darren has submitted new documentation we all need to review." As the materials were distributed, murmurs swept the room. A few pages in, one of the board members, a longtime ally of Victor Sloan, raised a hand. "This is damning." "Yes, but how can we be certain this wasn't fabricated after the fact?" "Darren has every reason to retaliate." The tension crackled like static. Darren didn't flinch. "If you believe I went through all of this for revenge," he said, "then maybe you haven't been listening at all." Before anyone could respond, a quiet knock interrupted the meeting. A woman stepped inside, accompanied by a sharp-suited attorney. She was in her late 30s, wearing a simple gray blazer, eyes steady but cautious. "My name is Maya Tran," she said. "I used to run thermal battery validation at the Nevada site, until I refused to alter safety data." Gasps echoed around the table. Maya reached into her bag and placed a USB drive on the table. "This contains recordings from my final meetings at Tesla, specifically with Victor Sloan. He told me to delete concerns from our internal system or face professional consequences." Elon nodded. "You can play it." The room fell silent as the audio played. Victor's voice was unmistakable. "I'm telling you this off the record. We can't afford a delay. Not now. You're either a team player, or you're not part of the team." There was more. Emails that had bounced back mysteriously. Reports never logged. Warnings ignored. The room shifted. Victor was summoned immediately. When he walked in, he glanced around and gave a cold smile. "Let me guess," he said. "This is the Darren show now?" Elon didn't blink. "You're here to answer, not to deflect." Victor sat slowly. "I've worked 2 decades to protect this company. And now I'm being painted as some kind of villain by bitter former staff with axes to grind." Maya's attorney raised a brow. "You threatened her job." "I pushed for results," Victor snapped. "That's my job." The board members looked at each other, some whispering, others watching carefully. The cracks were showing. Some began siding with Darren. Others hesitated, wary of the brand damage. Darren leaned forward. "You don't want the truth," he said quietly. "You want silence. You want things neat and quiet. No matter who gets buried along the way." The room fell quiet again. That evening, Darren returned home. It had been a long day. But something felt off the moment he stepped through the door. The hallway was dim. The kitchen light flickered. Papers lay scattered on the floor. His study door was ajar. He rushed in. The file cabinet, open. Folders tossed. The drawer hanging crooked on its rails. He checked the front security camera feed. Blank. Someone had wiped it. But he remembered the secondary unit in the garage, an older model. with a local SD card. He ran outside, grabbed the tiny chip, and slid it into his laptop. Grainy footage appeared. A man, wearing a hood and gloves, stepped into view. No face, no sound, just silent movements through the side door. He came in, he left, and left a message in his wake. Darren stared at the screen, chest rising and falling. Then he turned to the binder on his desk, what was left of it, and opened to the cover page. The title was simple: Battery Safety Breach, Unreported Incidents and Data Tampering. He picked it up slowly, walked back to his room, and sat in the dark beside his sleeping daughter. Tomorrow, he would return, and tomorrow, they would hear everything. Tesla's largest internal auditorium hadn't seen this many people since the last product launch. But today, there were no sleek vehicles on display, no stage lights, no promotional banners, just rows of employees, managers, engineers, and a handful of media liaisons, all summoned by one terse internal memo: leadership transparency briefing, attendance required. Outside the room, Darren stood quietly beside Elon, holding a black binder thick with documents. His fingers brushed the edge of the folder as if steadying himself. Elon looked at him and said softly, "Today isn't just about clearing your name. It's about setting a new standard for what we tolerate, and what we don't, in this company." Darren gave a slight nod. His eyes were clear, calm, but inside, something heavy twisted. At his side was Maya, composed as ever, carrying a slim folder and a flash drive. She wasn't here for a second chance. She was here to make sure no one else had to ask for one. Inside the auditorium, tension hung like fog. The front rows were filled with executives, including members of Tesla's board. Behind them sat directors from engineering, compliance, whispers echoed from wall to wall. Everyone knew something big was coming. No one knew how far it would go. 5 minutes past the hour. The double doors opened again. Victor Sloan walked in. He wore a tailored suit, his expression unreadable, though his stride had lost some of its usual certainty. His eyes caught Maya's for the briefest second before flicking away. He sat down, flanked by 2 compliance officers. The lights dimmed. Elon stepped up first. He didn't open with numbers or timelines. He didn't frame it as a procedural update. He simply said, "We owe you the truth." Then, he turned the floor over to Darren. Darren walked slowly to the podium, the binder under his arm, the room silently watching. "I want to begin with a photo," he said, his voice steady. The screen behind him lit up, showing a hospital bed, a pale little girl, her hair thin and her eyes closed. A woman sat beside her, holding her hand. "That's my daughter," Darren said. 2 years ago, she was diagnosed with leukemia. Around the same time, I discovered a serious flaw in one of our battery prototypes. I submitted my concerns through the proper channels. I asked for a pause in testing." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. "I was told to retract my warning, that it might damage investor confidence. When I refused, I was fired under the guise of ethical misconduct. That decision cost me my job, my health insurance, and nearly my daughter's treatment." Gasps were audible, shuffling, the sound of pens stopping mid-scratch. Darren opened his binder. "These," he said, "are the emails I sent. These are the replies I never received. And this," he lifted a small device, "is footage from my garage last week. After my home was broken into and files were searched. I can't prove who did it, but I can show you the lengths someone went to try and silence me." Next came Maya, calm and clear. She walked the audience through her experience. Names, dates, audio recordings, instances of red flags buried, safety issues ignored. Then came the flash drive. She played the recording. Victor's voice. "I'm telling you, you either support the leadership, or you're a problem." By now, people in the room weren't just whispering. Some were shaking their heads. Others stared down at their laps. Elon returned to the podium. "We began an internal review weeks ago," he said. "What we found corroborates at least 4 additional cases where safety concerns were suppressed under Victor Sloan's management." A slide appeared behind him. It listed key findings: tampering with reporting channels, coercive tactics, misuse of HR procedures to terminate dissenters. The room stirred louder now. Victor stood up, face flushed. "This is a coordinated attack," he barked. A group of disgruntled employees with nothing to lose, rallying under the false flag of justice. Then a voice called from the back. "May I say something?" It was Luis. He walked slowly to the front, holding up a phone. The screen showed the now viral video of Elon walking into McDonald's. The crowd in the footage applauding. Darren, stunned. Kelly's shocked face. "I don't work here," Luis said. "I flip burgers. I sweep floors. I don't know anything about internal systems or management chains. But I know what it looks like when a good man gets dragged down and still shows up every day. Still helps people. Still carries himself with dignity." He looked toward Darren. "I saw that before anyone else did. And now, so has the rest of the world." Silence. Then applause. At first from the back. Then rose closer to the front. Then the entire auditorium. Victor stood frozen. Then turned, pushing past a staffer, and walked out without a word. Darren didn't move. He stood there, letting the applause pass over him without lifting his hands. This wasn't triumph. It was truth. And for the first time in a long time. That was enough. The morning after the internal hearing, the tension around Tesla's headquarters had shifted into something more electric. Not fear, momentum. The kind that couldn't be stopped once it started rolling. News outlets had picked up the story overnight, fueled by the viral video Luis had posted of Elon walking into McDonald's to bring Darren home. By noon, Elon issued a company-wide statement. To ensure a thorough and impartial investigation, Tesla is placing Victor Sloan on immediate suspension. Effective today. The memo landed like a thunderclap. No euphemisms, no soft wording, just direct action. As employees whispered and phones buzzed across departments, Victor walked the halls, his steps slower than usual. He wasn't being escorted out, yet, but the shift in the air was undeniable. Then, just outside the executive elevator, he saw Darren. Victor stepped in his path, his voice low, almost calm. "You think you've won?" he said. "You've burned down a system because you couldn't take a little heat. For what? Some misguided sense of honor?" Darren looked him dead in the eye. His words measured. "I didn't burn it down. I'm just cleaning up the mess it left behind." Victor's eyes flickered, but he said nothing more. Just turned and walked away. Later that afternoon, Tesla's board convened behind closed doors. No press, no distractions, just decisions. By the end of the meeting, 3 major resolutions had been passed. First, Victor Sloan was officially stripped of all operational authority and removed from any future decision-making at Tesla. Second, the company would implement a whistleblower protection policy, clear, enforceable, and overseen by an independent body. And third, Tesla would publicly acknowledge and compensate employees who had been unjustly terminated due to internal retaliation. Darren and Maya were listed by name. As the news spread, so did the support. Online, the hashtag justice for Darren trended globally. People reposted the McDonald's footage alongside captions like, "Compassion can be leadership," and "Integrity starts at the top." But the most powerful image wasn't one captured on video. It came a week later. Darren stood at the entrance of Tesla's newest energy facility in Nevada. His daughter held his hand, her small fingers wrapped tight around his. She wore a sun hat, her face thin but bright. Above them, a freshly mounted sign read, "U Battery Initiative, led by integrity, built by truth." His daughter looked up at him, squinting against the sun. "Are you gonna start working a lot again, Daddy?" He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'll be working," he said, "but not the way I used to. I'm working so you can live well. So that no one ever has to choose between doing what's right and protecting their family again." She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. And for the first time in 2 long years, Darren Yu stepped through Tesla's doors not as a broken man, but as someone who'd rebuilt more than a career. He'd helped rebuild a conscience. To the world, Darren had won. His name was cleared, his position restored, his story shared across news platforms and boardrooms alike. But victory didn't feel like glory. Each morning, he woke up not to accolades, but to the beep of hospital machines and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. His daughter, pale but strong-willed, remained in treatment. He spent hours by her bedside, watching, hoping. There was no room in that silence for celebration. One afternoon, Elon stopped by Darren's new office, tucked inside the energy division's revamped wing. He sat across from him without ceremony. "You don't have to rush back in," Elon said gently. "Take the time you need. We'll manage." Darren shook his head slowly. "I'm not doing this because I have to," he said. "I'm doing it because I need to. I need to rebuild what we lost, with my own hands." There was no bravado in his voice, just quiet conviction. Within Tesla, the aftershocks of the Victor Sloan era still rippled. A few who had backed Victor now tried to shift their stance, offering half-hearted smiles in hallways. Quick nods in meetings. Darren acknowledged them, but didn't engage. He neither forgave nor attacked. His silence was enough to draw the line. Maya, calm but commanding, had been appointed as Tesla's internal ethics advisor. On her first day addressing a room full of department heads, she didn't hold back. "We're not here to erase the past," she said. "We're here to ensure it never gets written again." She didn't demand applause. She demanded accountability. Luis, the young man from McDonald's, was granted a full scholarship to a technical institute co-sponsored by Tesla. At his scholarship ceremony, he stood nervously at the podium in a wrinkled dress shirt, his voice cracking but clear. "I'm not studying engineering because I want to be an engineer," he said. "I'm doing it because someone needs to design systems where truth doesn't get punished." The room was silent for a moment. Then the applause came, slow, steady, sincere. Meanwhile, the story had started a chain reaction. Investigative journalists began turning over stones at other companies. Stories emerged, of whistleblowers ignored, of retaliation masked as restructuring. Darren's name became part of a larger conversation about corporate culture and human dignity. At a press conference weeks later, a reporter asked Darren a pointed question. "Do you forgive Victor Sloan?" Darren paused, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to say it right. "I'm not a judge," he said, "but I believe every decision has a consequence. Some show up quickly, some take time, but they always arrive." That evening, as the last of the daylight faded, Elon stood by the observation window overlooking the new battery lab. Inside, Darren was briefing his team, blueprints spread across the table, sleeves rolled up, voice low but focused. Beside Elon, his assistant watched quietly. Then Elon spoke, more to himself than anyone else. "I used to think the greatest thing I ever helped build was the electric car," he murmured, "but I was wrong. The greatest thing we can build is trust." 1 year had passed. The headlines had faded, the outrage cooled, and life at Tesla had found a new rhythm. But for Darren, nothing had truly gone back to normal. Because normal, as he now knew, was never safe for the truth. Tesla's annual conference had drawn a full crowd this year. The theme, displayed boldly on the stage backdrop, read, "Ethics and Innovation, Together or Not at All." It was more than just a slogan, it was a statement born of scars. Darren stood at the podium as the keynote speaker. It was the first time he'd addressed a public audience since the storm that had changed his life. And the company's cameras clicked, eyes waited, but Darren didn't come to retell the pain. He came to talk about the silence. "The most dangerous thing in any system," he said, his voice steady, "isn't the lie itself. It's the people who look away when the truth gets bent." There was no drama in his delivery, just clarity, like someone who'd lived every word. He went on to speak not about blame, but responsibility, especially for the young engineers who were just entering the field. "Be brilliant," he said, "build amazing things, but above all, have the courage to be good people. Because technology without conscience is just another form of destruction." As he stepped down from the stage, a man approached him, gray-haired, wearing a simple blazer. His handshake was firm, his voice low. "I'm Maya's father," the man said. "Thank you for not letting her believe that telling the truth was a burden." Darren could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. Backstage, Elon sat alone in a quiet corner, scrolling through emails. One new message caught his eye. It was from a former employee of a different tech firm. Anonymous but heartfelt. The story was all too familiar, warnings ignored, retaliation faced, truth buried. The last line read, "I just want to speak, once, without fear." Elon forwarded the message to Darren. No subject line, no explanation, just 6 words in the body of the email. Looks like it's not over yet. Darren stared at the screen. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he felt a tug at his arm. His daughter, no longer pale, no longer weak, stood beside him, smiling up at him. Her hair had grown back. Her laugh had returned. She was the reason he had held on. And now, she was the reason he kept going. "Do you think I should keep doing this?" he asked softly. She tilted her head. "If someone out there needs you like you once needed someone, then yes. Daddy, you should." The conference was winding down. Outside the building, the sun warmed the pavement. Darren stepped out into the light, blinking at the brightness. Just ahead, a small group of college students waited near the entrance, nervously holding notebooks, clearly hoping to talk to him. Darren smiled, not because it was expected, but because he meant it. He took a deep breath, then walked toward them. Because some truths don't rest. They ripple forward. Sometimes, the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. Darren didn't raise his voice. He didn't seek revenge. He simply chose to stand firm, for his daughter, for his values, and for everyone who's ever been silenced by power. So now, we ask you, what would you do if standing up for the truth meant losing everything first? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Shadow Secrets for more real, emotional stories that uncover the hidden battles behind everyday lives. We'll be here, sharing the truth, one story at a time.